She feared creating life with a human, until one soldier changed her world. HFY Lyra stood at the edge of the observation deck, her eyes scanning the vast horizon of her home planet, Drathel. The bright orange sun hung low, casting long shadows over the sprawling city below. The world of Drathel was advanced, a civilization far ahead of Earth in technology and knowledge. Yet, for all their achievements, their people were facing a crisis. Lyra, one of the brightest geneticists of her species, had been tasked with solving the problem. Drathel's population was slowly dwindling, and genetic mutations were spreading. The once immortal race, whose members lived for centuries, now faced a future of weakened health and infertility. Without a solution, their entire species might fade away in just a few generations. As a scientist, Lyra understood the importance of the mission. But as a daughter of Drathel, she couldn't ignore the deep-rooted fears that haunted her people. The fear of change, the fear of mixing their genetic legacy with the unknown. And the greatest unknown to the people of Drathel was humans. For centuries, humans had been seen as wild and unpredictable. Their short lives, their emotional instincts, their constant wars, it all made them seem far too unstable to mix with the carefully cultivated genes of the Drathel. And yet, as much as Lyra hated to admit it, humans had one thing Drathel lacked: adaptability. Lyra sighed, brushing a lock of silver hair behind her ear. She had been working on genetic experiments for years, but none of them had yielded results that could change the future of her species. It was then that the message had come: human involvement. A soldier, a human, had been sent to Drathel to assist her in her research. The project was risky, potentially groundbreaking, but also potentially catastrophic. Lyra knew what her people thought about humans. They viewed them as inferior, prone to emotional outbursts and impulsive actions. There had been times when humans had tried to trade with Drathel, but the encounters had often ended poorly, their misunderstandings leading to chaos. The idea of bringing human DNA into the equation was terrifying, yet here she was, staring at the communication panel, waiting for the soldier to arrive. His name was Jack Hawk, and he was a captain. Lyra didn't know much about him, but she had heard rumors. Some said he was a warrior, strong, fearless, a leader. Others said he was nothing more than a stubborn, reckless human who would only make things worse. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the door opening. She turned, and there he stood, Jack Hawk. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his stance confident, yet he seemed to be taking in his surroundings with a sense of curiosity. "Captain Hawk," Lyra said, her voice measured, calm. "Welcome to Drathel. I trust your journey was pleasant." Jack smiled, a little amused by her formal tone. "Pleasant enough. I'm sure it's nothing compared to what you're used to, though." Lyra didn't know how to respond. She had never met a human soldier face to face. She was used to dealing with diplomats and scientists, never with someone like Jack, but she pushed the unease aside. There was work to be done. "Let's get straight to it then," Lyra said, gesturing toward the table where their research was laid out. "We've already begun some preliminary experiments, but I'll need your help to move forward. The human DNA must be integrated with our own, and I'm sure you're aware of the challenges involved." Jack's smile faded slightly as he nodded. "I've read the reports. I understand the risks, but I'm here to do whatever it takes to help you save your people." Lyra didn't know if she could trust his words. Was it just bravado, or was there something deeper in his eyes? There was something about him, something that unsettled her. But she couldn't let herself be distracted by feelings. She had a mission, and so did he. "We will start with the preliminary genetic analysis," Lyra said, her voice firm. "I will begin by comparing your human DNA with the most recent mutations in our species. If we can find a way to combine the two, it might give us the stability we need." Jack sat down at the table, his hands folded in front of him. His blue eyes were calm, but Lyra could see a spark of determination. He was not afraid. It struck her. He was brave. And yet, why did it make her nervous? As the hours passed, Lyra explained their genetic structure in detail, showing Jack how her people had evolved. The Drathel had been isolated for millennia, and their biology was incredibly complex. They had long ago mastered the art of controlling their genes, ensuring only the strongest traits were passed down. But now, that control had become a curse. They had become too pure, too rigid. The next generation was weaker, more prone to disease. Only by adapting their biology could they hope to survive. Jack listened closely, asking insightful questions. He didn't seem intimidated by the technicalities, nor by Lyra's cold, distant demeanor. She couldn't help but notice that he never once looked down on her for her species' problems. His focus was entirely on finding a solution. "I can't pretend to understand your biology," Jack said after a long silence, his voice thoughtful. "But I know one thing: humans are resilient. We adapt, we survive. If there's any chance that mixing our DNA could help you, I'm in. Let's find that way." Lyra stared at him. This was the first time a human had spoken to her in such a way. His words were simple, but they carried weight. It wasn't just the promise of survival. There was something deeper in them, something that suggested a belief in their future. But the fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. She couldn't let herself be swayed by sentiment. Not now. "I will need time to prepare the equipment for the genetic fusion," Lyra said, standing up. "You will be required for the next stage, Captain. Your DNA will be essential." Jack nodded without hesitation, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm ready." But even as he spoke those words, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that the path ahead would not be as simple as either of them hoped. This was more than just science. There were unknowns, and the most significant unknown of all was what would happen when human and alien life combined. As the days passed, Lyra and Captain Jack spent more time together in the lab, their research progressing rapidly. The initial discomfort between them began to fade as they worked side by side, exchanging ideas, thoughts, and even small laughs. Lyra, always focused on her work, found herself growing more aware of Jack, not just as a human soldier, but as an individual. Jack was different from what she had expected. She had assumed humans would be impulsive, driven more by emotion than reason. Yet, as they analyzed the genetic data together, Jack displayed an unusual depth of understanding. His questions were thoughtful, his approach to the experiments practical. He wasn't just a soldier. He was intelligent, dedicated, and surprisingly patient. Lyra's people had always valued intellect above all else. Their society had grown around the pursuit of knowledge and perfection, and yet they lacked the one thing Jack seemed to possess: a deep, unshakable belief in the potential for change. Humans, with their short lives, were forced to adapt quickly, to grow stronger through their trials. Lyra had spent her entire life studying her own kind's perfection, their almost rigid nature. Yet in Jack, she saw something her species had forgotten: flexibility, adaptability, and resilience. It was strange. Her people feared humans, saw them as unpredictable and dangerous. Yet every day with Jack, Lyra was forced to confront the growing feeling that their adaptability was exactly what her people needed. One evening, as they worked late in the lab, Lyra found herself speaking more openly than she ever had before. "I've been thinking about what you said about humans being resilient," she said, glancing at Jack as he worked beside her. Maybe you're right. Maybe we've become too rigid, too focused on control. Our way of life has worked for centuries, but now it's failing us. Perhaps we need the kind of flexibility you have." Jack didn't look up from his task, but he smiled. "You've got a point. Sometimes the only way forward is to let go of the way things have always been done." Lyra looked at him, surprised by his understanding. She had expected resistance, a human who wouldn't understand the complexities of Drathal society. But Jack was different. He seemed to have a deeper grasp of the situation than most of her colleagues. His words made her question everything she had believed about the human race. "Maybe this experiment can work," Lyra said quietly, more to herself than to Jack. "Maybe it's time to try something new." Jack finally turned to her, his expression sincere. "I'm just here to help, Lyra, whatever it takes. And if we succeed, it's not just a win for you or for me, but for both our worlds." His words struck her, and for the first time since they'd started working together, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this experiment, this merging of human and Drathal, could be the key to saving both their species. But as much as she wanted to believe that, doubt still lingered in her mind. What if the experiment failed? What if the hybrid child was too unstable, too dangerous? Lyra knew the risks all too well. She had studied genetic combinations her entire life, and there was always the chance that merging two vastly different species could result in catastrophic consequences. She had no doubt that there were those on Drathal who would consider any hybrid an abomination, no matter the potential benefits. Yet something about Jack made her wonder. There was a calmness in his presence, a steadiness that seemed to ground her. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him, and trust the process they were about to begin. One morning, after several weeks of late-night work, Lyra and Jack stood before the chamber where the first round of genetic fusion was about to take place. The room was sterile, the air filled with the faint hum of advanced equipment. The mixture of human and Drathal genetic material had been carefully prepared, ready for the first trial. The chamber was equipped to monitor the process in real time, ensuring that any unexpected developments could be dealt with immediately. "Are you ready?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, though her insides churned with nervousness. Jack, who had been quiet for some time, looked at her and nodded. "I am, but I think the real question is, are you ready?" Lyra blinked, surprised by the question. What do you mean?" Jack's gaze softened. "You've been afraid of this, haven't you?" "Afraid of what we're about to do?" Lyra hesitated. For all her intelligence, for all the data she had studied, she had never considered how emotionally challenging this moment would be. She was about to bring two worlds together in a way that had never been done before. And while the scientist in her knew it was necessary, the part of her that had grown up surrounded by Drathal traditions, the part of her that feared change, was terrified. "Of course I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the future of my people depends on it, and I can't let my fear stand in the way." Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "Then let's do it, Lyra. Let's make sure this works." With a deep breath, Lyra activated the equipment. The chamber came to life, the machines humming louder as the fusion process began. The genetic material was introduced into the system, carefully monitored as it merged. Jack stood beside her, his presence a quiet strength. As the fusion took place, the data flowed onto the screens, showing the integration of the two species' DNA. At first, everything appeared normal, but then there was a slight shift, a fluctuation in the readings. Lyra's eyes widened as she quickly adjusted the settings. The hybrid cells were reacting faster than anticipated. They were evolving at an extraordinary rate, their genetic material blending with such speed and precision that it defied expectation. The process was working, but it was happening much faster than they had predicted. "Lyra, what's happening?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I'm not sure," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety she felt. "The hybrid cells are evolving faster than anticipated. It's almost as if the two species are perfectly attuned to each other." Jack's gaze remained fixed on the screen, his expression serious. "Is this good or bad?" Lyra took a moment, analyzing the data. It's good. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. The hybrid is developing at an accelerated rate, but it's stable. The integration is happening without rejection." Jack let out a breath, clearly relieved. "Well, that's a good sign, right?" Lyra nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in her chest. This was only the first step. The real test would come when the hybrid was born, and when it was, would it truly be a new hope for their species? Or would it be something they could never control? The experiment wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since they had started, Lyra allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this experiment could succeed. Jack turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "We're in this together, Lyra. Whatever happens, we face it together." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The bond between them had deepened, from colleagues to something more. She didn't know where this journey would take them, but she knew one thing for certain. With Jack by her side, anything was possible. The weeks that followed were a blur of data analysis, late nights, and unexpected successes. Lyra and Jack were working faster than either had anticipated. Their initial fears and doubts slowly gave way to a sense of cautious optimism. Every day, the hybrid cells grew stronger, their adaptability surpassing even Lyra's predictions. There were still risks, but with each success, the hope for a better future became clearer. Jack had become more than just a colleague to Lyra. He was a friend, a constant presence in her life. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. It was subtle at first, an exchanged smile, a shared joke, but over time it grew into something neither of them had expected. They were from different worlds, yet somehow they fit together. Lyra had always believed that emotions were a distraction. Her people had never allowed themselves to be ruled by feelings. Logic and reason were the guiding forces of their society. But Jack had a way of seeing the world that made her question everything she had been taught. He was spontaneous, open, and in many ways more alive than anyone she had ever known. For the first time, Lyra felt as though she was truly seeing the world through someone else's eyes. someone who wasn't afraid to feel, to risk, to love. One evening, as they worked late into the night, Lyra caught herself staring at Jack for a moment too long. He was focused on a screen, typing in commands with his usual calm precision. The soft glow of the lab lights reflected off his face, casting shadows that made him look even more intense, more human. "Is something wrong?" Jack's voice broke through her thoughts, and Lyra blinked, realizing that she had been lost in her own mind. She quickly looked away, trying to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I was just thinking about the results from today's test. We're seeing some unprecedented growth in the hybrid cells. I think we're getting closer." Jack smiled, though there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes. "I thought you were thinking about something else for a moment there." Lyra met his gaze, surprised. "What do you mean?" Jack leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed casually over his chest. "You've been looking at me differently lately, not just as a soldier or a colleague, but I don't know, maybe as something more." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected Jack to notice, never expected her own feelings to be so visible to him. She had tried to keep her emotions in check, knowing that their work was far too important to be clouded by personal attachments. "You're imagining things," she said quickly, trying to brush off the sudden tension in the air. "We're just getting results, that's all." Jack didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her with that steady, unwavering gaze, as if waiting for her to admit what she already knew. The truth was, she had been thinking about him differently. More than once, she had caught herself wondering what it would be like to live without the constant weight of responsibility on her shoulders. What would it be like to just be? Free from the pressures of saving her people, free from the fear of failure. What would it be like to feel something real with Jack, to share something beyond the sterile, emotionless world she had always known? But then she remembered the mission. The stakes were too high. She couldn't let herself be distracted. Not now. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The hybrid cells were showing remarkable growth, their genetic structures adapting faster than expected. The team was ready to begin the next phase of the experiment, the creation of the hybrid embryo. Lyra stood in front of the chamber, her heart pounding as she prepared the final stages of the procedure. The human and Drathel DNA had been successfully integrated, and now it was time to see if they could bring the creation to life. The room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the machinery. Jack stood beside her, his presence reassuring. "I'm ready," Jack said quietly, his voice steady. Lyra turned to him, meeting his gaze. For a moment she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a softness, a trust that went beyond their work, beyond the mission. She felt a sudden rush of warmth spread through her chest. "We're doing something incredible," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This could change everything." Jack nodded, his expression serious. "I know, but we're in this together, Lyra. We've come this far. Whatever happens, we face it together." Lyra swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words, together. It was a simple word, but in that moment it carried so much meaning. She wasn't alone anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. With a deep breath, Lyra activated the chamber. The machines hummed to life, and the hybrid embryo began to form, its cells dividing and multiplying at an astonishing rate. The data flowed onto the screens, showing a smooth integration of human and Drathel genetic material. Lyra watched in silence, her heart racing. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. She had spent her entire life studying genetics, but this was something entirely new, something she couldn't predict. As the process continued, Jack remained by her side, watching the data with intense focus. Lyra could feel his presence beside her, a quiet strength that gave her confidence. They had come this far together, and now they were about to take the next step. The minutes passed, and the embryo began to take shape, its cells growing stronger with each passing second. But just as Lyra allowed herself to feel a sense of triumph, something unexpected happened. A sudden spike in the data, a fluctuation. Lyra's eyes widened. "What's happening? The hybrid cells, something's wrong." Jack's voice was urgent as he grabbed the controls. "I'll adjust the settings," but it was too late. The spike in the data grew more intense, and the hybrid embryo began to show signs of instability. The cells were mutating faster than they could control, the genetic material breaking down and reforming in unexpected ways. The machinery began to buzz erratically, and alarms blared across the room. Lyra's mind raced. This was exactly what she had feared. The hybrid cells were unstable, and they were spiraling out of control. If they couldn't stop the process, it could lead to catastrophic results. "Shut it down," Lyra shouted, her voice frantic. "Shut down the system now!" Jack worked quickly, his hands moving over the controls with practiced speed. But as the data continued to spike, the system went into emergency shutdown. The chamber's lights flickered and the alarms finally fell silent. Lyra stood frozen, staring at the now blank screens. The experiment had failed. She felt a deep pang of disappointment, a heavy weight settling in her chest. She had been so sure. So certain that this was the answer, but now everything was in doubt. Jack turned to her, his face serious. "We'll figure this out. We can fix it, Lyra." Lyra shook her head, her mind clouded with frustration. "No, we can't. We've gone too far. If the hybrid cells are this unstable now, there's no way we can continue." But Jack stepped closer, his eyes unwavering. "We don't know that yet. We've only just begun. Let's take a step back, analyze what went wrong. We're not giving up, not now. Not after everything we've done." Lyra met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this wasn't the end. But fear, doubt, and uncertainty clouded her thoughts. What if they couldn't fix it? What if the hybrid experiment was doomed to fail? But Jack wasn't backing down. He was right. They had come this far. "We'll try again," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "We'll make this work. We have to." Jack smiled, his expression full of determination. "Together!" And for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This wasn't over yet. They were far from finished. Lyra sat in the quiet of the lab, the sterile room filled with the soft hum of machines that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. The failure of the previous experiment weighed heavily on her mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. The hybrid cells had shown instability, yes, but the solution wasn't far out of reach. She just had to find it. She had spent hours studying the data, the fluctuations, and the mutations. There had to be a way to stabilize the genetic material, something they had missed, a variable that could turn the tide in their favor. Jack had left the lab hours ago, promising to get some rest, but Lyra knew she couldn't stop. She couldn't afford to. The fate of her people of both species depended on this. The doors to the lab slid open, and Jack stepped inside, his tired face breaking into a small smile when he saw her still at the workstation. "Still here?" he asked, his voice soft. Lyra didn't look up immediately. She was too focused on the data before her. "I can't rest, Jack, not until I figure out what went wrong." He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've been at this for hours. You need to step away for a bit." "I can't," she replied, her voice sharp. "If we don't fix this, if we don't get it right, there may not be a chance for us again." Jack didn't say anything. He simply waited, standing by her side, a steady presence in the chaos of her thoughts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra leaned back in her chair, her hands resting in her lap. "You're right," she said, her voice quieter now. "But we can't stop. I've seen what our people have become. We've lost our adaptability, Jack. We need this more than anything." Jack didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her, his gaze intense. After a long silence, he spoke again. "Then we'll get it right together." Lyra met his eyes, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. His words, his unwavering belief, were exactly what she needed. She had been so focused on the science, on the facts and data, that she had forgotten about the human element, what had drawn her to Jack in the first place. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now. "Let's do this." They worked through the night, adjusting the genetic mixture once more, carefully monitoring the data as the new sequence was introduced. This time there was no panic. There was no rushing. They worked in sync, following the process step by step. Lyra found herself trusting Jack more and more with each passing moment. His calm demeanor balanced her urgency, and together they began to unravel the puzzle they had been chasing. By the time the morning sun began to rise outside the lab, the new hybrid cells were showing promising signs of stability. They were growing at a steady rate, adapting to the genetic mix without the unpredictable fluctuations that had occurred before. "We've done it," Lyra whispered, staring at the screens, her heart pounding in her chest. Jack stood beside her, looking at the data with the same sense of awe. "I think we've really done it." The hybrid cells were stable. More than that, they were thriving. There was no sign of the instability they had encountered earlier, and everything appeared to be progressing normally. Lyra couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of her lips. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. "We'll need to move quickly," she said, her voice steady but filled with purpose. We can't waste any more time. The next phase is crucial. Jack nodded. I'm with you every step of the way. As they began preparations for the next phase, the creation of the hybrid embryo, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement building inside her. This was it, the moment they had both been working toward, the moment that could change everything. The chamber was ready. The equipment was prepared. The hybrid cells were waiting. Lyra activated the system, her hands moving swiftly over the controls. The machinery hummed to life as the hybrid cells were carefully introduced into the chamber, ready to grow and develop. Lyra watched the data as the cells began to divide, their growth steady and controlled. Jack stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the screens. "It's working," he said quietly. Lyra nodded, but her thoughts were already ahead of the process. This was just the beginning. The real challenge would come later, when the embryo began to develop more rapidly. They had never created life like this before, and while the data suggested success, there was no guarantee that the hybrid would survive. Minutes passed, and the hybrid embryo began to take shape. Its cells were dividing faster than expected, but there was no sign of the instability that had plagued their previous attempts. Lyra's heart raced as the data flowed in, each new reading confirming what she had hoped. This time it was working. The embryo continued to grow, its development strong and steady. Lyra and Jack watched in silence, their eyes locked on the screens, their hearts beating in time with the growing life in the chamber. And then the embryo shifted. A new set of data appeared on the screen, data that neither of them had anticipated. The hybrid cells were evolving, but in a way that was different from their expectations. It wasn't just growth, it was something more. The cells were adapting in ways that even Lyra couldn't have predicted. "Jack," Lyra said, her voice a mix of awe and concern. "The hybrid it's evolving faster than we anticipated. This could be something completely new." Jack turned to her, his expression serious. "Is that good or bad?" Lyra's mind raced. "I'm not sure. It's unprecedented. The hybrid is developing at an accelerated rate. It's as if it's already starting to adapt to its environment." Jack's eyes widened. "That's incredible." Lyra didn't respond. She was too focused on the data, her mind working through the possibilities. This was more than they had expected. The hybrid wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, evolving in ways no one had anticipated. "We need to keep a close watch on this," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. "We can't let our guard down. We don't know what the final result will be." As they continued to monitor the hybrid embryo, something incredible happened. The cells began to exhibit signs of intelligence, patterns of activity that suggested a level of cognitive function. It was like nothing either of them had ever seen before. The hybrid was not just alive, it was aware. Lyra and Jack exchanged a look of amazement. "It's thinking," Lyra whispered. Jack took a step back, his breath caught in his chest. This changes everything." For the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself a small smile. She had feared that creating life with a human would be a mistake. But as she looked at the developing hybrid, she saw something beautiful, something that could change the course of history for both their species. "This is it," Lyra said softly. "We've created something new." Jack's smile matched hers, but there was a note of caution in his eyes. "What happens next?" Lyra turned to him, her gaze serious. "Next, we raise the hybrid, we see what it becomes, and we make sure it can thrive. This is the beginning of a new era." Together, they stood in silence, watching the hybrid grow and evolve, knowing that their world, both human and Drathal, had just entered a new chapter. The days after the hybrid's rapid development felt like a whirlwind. The lab became a hub of activity as Lyra and Jack worked tirelessly to ensure that the hybrid child, this new life they had created together, was healthy, stable, and most importantly, safe. The embryo that had started as a mere combination of two species, genetic material, was now a growing being, developing faster than any living creature they had studied before. Lyra watched as the hybrid cells formed intricate patterns, a strange intelligence flickering within them. The embryo wasn't just alive, it was conscious, aware of its surroundings, reacting in ways no one had predicted. Lyra often found herself standing by the viewing window, staring at the small, growing form inside the chamber. It was incredible, beautiful even. The way its body moved with fluidity, the way its eyes blinked as if it could already see. There was something otherworldly about it, but also something familiar. Jack stood beside her one morning, his expression thoughtful as he watched the hybrid child, now in its early stages of development, floating in the growth chamber. It was no longer just a mass of cells, it was a child, a perfect combination of human and Drathel. "It's amazing," Jack said softly, his voice filled with awe. "We've created something so new, so different." Lyra nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "Yes. But we don't know what will happen as it grows. We don't know how it will adapt to both species. It could be unstable, it could fail." Jack looked at her, his eyes steady. "But it might also be the answer to everything, a bridge between our worlds." Lyra's gaze lingered on the hybrid child. She didn't want to admit it, but Jack was right. This was bigger than just saving her people or helping humans. This was about bringing two worlds together, about creating something stronger, more adaptable than anything they had ever known. But could they really create a future where both species could live side by side? Would this hybrid child truly be the answer? They spent hours each day monitoring the child's development, collecting data, making adjustments. The hybrid's mind was sharp, far sharper than anything Lyra had expected. It responded to stimuli, it processed information, and it communicated in its own unique way, a silent exchange of thoughts that Lyra and Jack had yet to fully understand. It was during one of their late-night sessions in the lab that something extraordinary happened. As they were adjusting the child's growth parameters, the hybrid's gaze locked with Lyra's. For the first time, the child reached out, its small hand pressing gently against the glass of the chamber, as if trying to make contact. Lyra froze. Jack, who had been observing the monitors, looked up at the same moment. The child's eyes were wide and intelligent, reflecting an awareness that shouldn't have been possible for a creature so young. It wasn't just a baby anymore. It was thinking, feeling. Jack took a step forward, his hand hovering near the glass. "It's like it's reaching out to you," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Lyra slowly placed her hand on the glass, meeting the child's gaze. There was a silent exchange between them, an understanding that neither of them could put into words. For a moment, the world outside the lab faded. All that mattered was the connection between her and the hybrid child. "What are you trying to tell me?" Lyra whispered under her breath. The child blinked, its eyes bright and curious, but it didn't respond in any way that Lyra could understand. But she felt something stir within her. It wasn't just the bond between parent and child. It was something deeper, something that went beyond simple biology. Jack watched quietly, his presence comforting but distant. He knew that this moment wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a turning point, not just for them, but for the future of both species. The days that followed were filled with more milestones. The hybrid child continued to grow at an astonishing rate. Its body developed quickly, but more surprising was its mind. It learned quickly, absorbing knowledge from both humans and Drathel as if it was instinctual. Lyra had never seen anything like it. The hybrid child was a perfect blend of both worlds, strong, adaptable, intelligent. But even as they marveled at the child's rapid progress, a new challenge emerged. The political leaders of Drathel and Earth had become aware of the hybrid's existence. It was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It had become a symbol of the potential for unity between two very different species. But not everyone saw it that way. The leaders of Drathel were divided. Some saw the hybrid as a gift, a chance to save their people from extinction, while others feared what it represented. A few even believed it was an abomination, a violation of their sacred genetic code. On Earth, the reaction was just as mixed. Some governments saw the hybrid as a weapon, a tool that could be used for military or political purposes. Others, like Jack's superiors, believed it could be a chance to unite their world with Drathel, to create an alliance that could reshape the galaxy. But there were also those who were terrified of the unknown, of the potential consequences of merging two such different species. Lyra and Jack knew that the hybrid child's future was at risk. If the wrong people got their hands on it, the child could be used as a pawn in a political game, a symbol of power rather than hope. They had to act quickly. The tension in the air grew as both governments sent representatives to Drathel, demanding access to the child. Lyra knew the pressure was mounting. They couldn't let the hybrid be controlled. It wasn't a weapon, it was a new life, and it had the potential to change the world. One night, as Lyra and Jack stood in front of the chamber watching the hybrid child sleep, Jack turned to her, his expression serious. "We can't let anyone take it," he said, his voice firm. It's not just ours to protect, it's the future of both our worlds. Lyra nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of their responsibility. She had never imagined that creating life with a human would lead to something so complicated. But now, there was no turning back. The hybrid child wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was a living being, and it deserved to live free from the control of any government or power-hungry faction. "We'll fight for it," Lyra said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll protect it no matter what." But as the days passed, the pressure mounted. A new decision was made. The hybrid would be presented to the leaders of both species, a decision that would decide its future. Lyra and Jack knew that if the hybrid was put on display, it would be examined, dissected, and controlled. They couldn't let that happen. They made a plan, one that would ensure the hybrid child's safety even if it meant leaving everything behind. It was risky, but they had no other choice. They would take the child and disappear, moving to a place where both human and Drathel could live in peace, away from the political conflicts that threatened them. The night of the presentation arrived. As the officials gathered in the chamber, Lyra and Jack prepared to make their move. The hybrid child, now fully formed and alert, stood beside them, its eyes intelligent and aware, as if it understood what was happening. "You're not just a part of us," Lyra whispered, looking down at the child. "You're the future, and you will have the chance to live your life free from fear." With one last glance at the chamber, Lyra and Jack left, the hybrid child in their arms. They walked out of the lab and into the unknown, knowing that they were giving the child a future where it could choose its own path. And as they disappeared into the horizon, leaving the politics and conflicts behind, they knew that the future of both species was now in the hands of the hybrid child. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was theirs to walk together.